In this episode, we're going to be covering the hose. We're going to be covering specifically a trunk hose, which was a commonly worn garment for men on their legs. We're going to stick to the same time period, so we're going to do a trunk hose from the late 16th century. By this time, the hose was already kind of at its most developed, so in the construction that we're going to do, we're going to see pretty much all of the common components of a hose during that time. So here we have like a few examples of what a trunk hose would have looked like. These aren't the best. They're good because they're colored, but they're not the best pictures to show it. But here we can kind of start seeing some of the construction of it. And I know these are really low definition, but we're gonna look at some better examples soon. But they were basically a trunk hose would be quite short. There's also a different type of hose which is kind of knee length, and I think it ends just under the knees. But basically what you have is a construction very similar to modern day trousers once you really deconstruct it and look at the bottom shapes, but one in which you have basically two layers. So you have an exterior layer which is made out of separate panels that are cut and they have room in between them, so they don't offer full coverage. And then underneath that you have a lining which is gathered all around, which creates this kind of volume that you're kind of seeing. And why they're so puffy is because you have all the fabric underneath from the lining, and then on top of that you have the panels which sit on top of it. So you can see it here, you can see that separation here. So these are the panels, and then underneath you're seeing the lining. Same with this here. And in both of these two examples, and most of the trunk hose examples that we're seeing, the lining is visible in the sense that you can see it underneath the panels, but it does not come outside of that. There's a lot of examples from this plunder hose here in which the lining comes through those gaps in between the panels, but these panels are also a lot bigger. I already did a plunder hose before, and this is kind of what that would look like. And you can see the panels here, and you can see how the lining just gets fed outside of those gaps there. And this is pretty much the basic construction. The only thing we'll do is we'll have much more panels that are going to cover it. It's going to be much shorter, and we're not going to see the lining coming from those gaps. But yeah, the one we're doing today is going to be much more simple, so I'm not that worried about it. So the plunder hose that we're going to be referencing and we're going to be following very, very closely is this one here. And this was worn by Don Garcia de Medici, and this was actually what he was buried in. So these pictures here, the real life examples, are kind of what's left over from that. It's obviously in horrible conditions, but somehow, some way, they've been able to put together a pattern that was pretty accurate to the original, which is very good. It's going to help us tremendously. Again, what I'm referencing here, all these notes are from Janet Arnold's Patterns of Fashion series. There's some incredible books, and I recommend them. The way they're made and all the information inside of them is incredible, so I can't recommend them enough. But yeah, we're going to be referencing this half of the page. This is all of the plunder hose patterns. So we have a waistband here. There's nothing really crazy. We have this at the center back, which is this piece here. Other than that, it's just a regular waistband. And then this is the lining I was talking about earlier. And basically why I was saying that the pattern itself is pretty close to what we know now to be the pattern of a trouser is, even though it looks weird, if you do a cut right here, and you do a cut right here, and you bring the piece on this left side over to this side, you're gonna have something that resembles much more a regular trouser. And we're gonna see that in CLO3D when I start working. But this is gonna be the lining. It gets gathered across the top, it gets gathered across the bottom, and then over top of the lining we're gonna have all of these different panes that go from the top to the bottom. And the lining, I think, it's a crimson satin lining, and then these would have been velvet with I think a satin or linen backing. But yeah, this goes all the way around the legs. Something to notice here is when we go to the crotch area, which is this area here, the panes aren't split up anymore. So this is all one piece, but they're cut all the way, almost all the way up. But you're leaving a little bit there so that it stays as one piece. Whereas the rest are cut and basically are individual pieces. So that's the main part of the trouser, and then we can also of the hose. And then we can also see that on the front we have what was very common, a cod piece, and this is going to go right on the front. The pattern, it's not very clear to me yet, so I'm gonna have to experiment a little bit. It's a little bit different than the one I did previously, so it shouldn't be anything too crazy, but yeah, this basically just goes around the front, and there's nothing really too crazy there. The only part is it gets all the padding from a lining that you can see here. These little cuts are made into the velvet outer part so that the lining starts getting pulled out a little bit, and that's what you see there. And then it's tied to the front there with a knot. Also, what's interesting about this is you basically have all of these here, all of these eyelet holes, and those were because the way you would hold these up together, these were not held up by a belt or a drawstring like we would do today. These were held up by being tied to the doublet. So all those eyelet holes, you put one of these laces through them, and then you put it through the waistband, and then you put it through the doublet hem part here, and then you tie them together, and that kind of holds everything as one piece together. Very interesting, you know. It's not very functional for today, but a very interesting way of doing things. So yeah, on the panes, these are velvet, and across all of these lines here are couched cord. So these were actually not gathers, these were pleated, and these were cartridge pleats. It's very tough to do cartridge pleats in CLO3D to this level, so we're just gonna do a gather and call it a day. Yeah, let's get to it. So like always, when you're making a pair of trousers in CLO3D, you want to start with the waistband pretty much every single time. So I'm just creating the waistband from two pieces here and placing it on the waist. I'm just making sure it's placed exactly where I want it to be, so that when I create my trouser, it's nicely balanced, and I can problem solve the crotch and how it falls around the hips much more accurately. And I'm gonna start by freezing it here once I get the position straight, just so I can begin working without having to worry about the waistband moving around and making sure everything is kind of balanced correctly. And then here I'm just starting to make the lining, so the layer underneath. And I'm gonna start making it as you would usually make a trouser pattern. So you're gonna see me make basically what would be the pattern on like a very loose type of basketball shorts. And it's gonna be much looser than the waistband, so that it gets the nice gathers at the waist. And later we're also gonna gather it at the hem as well. But here I'm just making sure the crotch is nicely lined up, and I'm kind of showing here how from our regular pattern for a trouser, like a modern pattern, you can achieve the pattern for the lining when you bring it together at the inseam. It's very interesting because we have this kind of development now for many reasons, but back then they wouldn't have done things this way. It's nice to always see how those kind of relate to each other. So yeah, you see me merge those together, and here I'm just problem solving the crotch a little bit, making sure that the length is nice and proper. And I also copied for the crotch, I think on the back side, that interesting shape. I didn't know at this point what that was for really, but I just copied the shape because I saw it on the pattern, and I wanted to kind of make sure I'm following things, like I'm following the specific structure of the historical pattern. And here I'm actually gonna introduce the feature that I saw on the reference pattern, and that is this kind of inset at the center back that creates this triangle going into the back of the trouser. And now it's starting to make a lot more sense how things are lined up. So I'm just lining up the sewing there on the waistband so that I can use this feature and sew it properly. Now I unfroze the waistband because it's always good to let the trouser naturally fall how it wants to. You never want to constrain movement too much when you're working with this. You always kind of want to let the fabric flow in the way it wants to. This is for sure appropriate in when you're making clothes in real life. But it kind of applies to CLO3D as well, because you are kind of dependent on the physics of the fabric and what the fabric shows you to show what you're gonna do. So I did that, and I just kind of pinned it in place, and I also double layered the waistband. Now here I skipped ahead a little bit because I made a mistake that took me quite a long time to fix, so I just skipped that part for the video. But the only thing I did since that part is I basically just added an elastic to the hem. That's the only thing I did, and I made the lining a little bit shorter just to get the proportions correct. And I think you also saw me just now take out the middle part at the crotch for the lining because it was a little bit too wide in there. And now I'm moving on to the panels on the top, and for this I tried a lot of different techniques, and I kind of left the whole process of me figuring it out in the video because I thought it was interesting to see. So here I'm just kind of looking at how two panels would react if you strengthen them, if you just leave them, just regularly leave them to without any strengthening. Then I tried to double them up to see how they look with 2 layers, and it's all kind of going into my kind of the experimentation I need to find the correct silhouette for the garment. Again, I'm not trying to recreate it one by one with the reference, but I am following the reference and I want to make it look like the reference. So I have to go through these kind of phases of experimentation to make sure I get the right technique. And the way I shoot these videos, I definitely do a lot of research beforehand and try to familiarize myself with the techniques used and what fabrics they used and what the patterns look like. But it's my first time making them for a lot of these pieces. It's very much a learning experience for me as well. So I don't think that's a bad thing, since you can kind of see how the problem solving happens in order to recreate something historical or something a little bit more complex, which is for sure always valuable. So that's why I'm leaving this kind of section here, because I think it's useful to kind of see how you can use different techniques in CLO to recreate something a little bit more complex. So basically what I did here is I just kind of I just overlapped the lining onto itself. And the thought was that if I just overlap this onto itself and make it a little bit longer and then give it that strength, then it'll start ballooning out more. And it did work. It wasn't the best, but you can see it balloon out more like our references. And the reason for this is the lining will always stay the same length, and it kind of acts as an anchor, because if you lengthen the panels above the lining, then they have to kind of turn back on themselves and reach up to be sewn onto the lining at the bottom, and this helps with the ballooning of the shape. But you can quickly see here that one of the problems is that because the lining was gathered, once you take the panels and put them above, they start overlapping each other a lot in the middle. And you can see it goes, like they become much bigger from the where they're sewn in, because the lining was gathered in there. So I think what I'm gonna do here in just a little bit is make all of these a little bit thinner, just to account for that. In reality, you want these to be kind of side by side from top to bottom. You don't want them to overlap like crazy. You definitely want a cleaner finish. So I'm kind of fixing that, and you can already see we're getting much closer to the silhouette we want. But I think I'm still not very happy with the result here. So there's still quite a lot of work to do. And you can also see on the center back here, this panel is causing quite a lot of trouble because the way it's sewn in. I'll end up fixing that I think a little bit later. But yeah, it creates a really like an aesthetic thing going on there. And for the middle panel, the one in the crotch, I had to make it much shorter because it looks like it gets pushed down because there's excess fabric. It gets pushed down, it doesn't really balloon, and I can't strengthen it because it's at the crotch. And usually in CLO3D, if you're working with in the area of the crotch, you want the least complexity possible, because CLO sometimes gets confused with which layer is on top of where, especially if they're kind of beside each other and fighting for space like you see at the crotch. So I'm gonna end up making a few more changes to fix that, but right here I'm just kind of working on this center back panel, trying to sew it properly. See, there I was following the reference, and in the reference the panel is written is drawn in the same way as I have it in CLO, but it just wasn't making much sense to me as to how that would work when sewn. Therefore, I ended up changing the silhouette of the panel in order to kind of accommodate for that. So here I just skipped ahead, and I just took out the sewing just so I relax it and I kind of see how it wants to be sewn on. And then it was just a simple change just to match the shapes. And yeah, that wasn't much more difficult, but now I have to fix again the panel that's at the crotch, and you can see as soon as I add the strengthening, it starts to droop down even though we shortened it already. And I'll end up, you can see I already made the cuts like they were in our pattern. I made the cuts at the panel that's inside of the crotch, so you get those nice openings as well in there. But because CLO is so difficult to work with in those areas where fabrics overlap a lot and kind of fight with each other for space, I'm gonna end up taking those out because they don't serve any real purpose, aesthetic or obviously functional. So because of that, there's just no need for me to add extra complexity there. Like when I present this in my portfolio, it's not going to show. And even if you put this into a game, like you're not gonna see that area, so there's no point of adding the complexity. So here I'm making it shorter just so we get a nice even silhouette on the bottom. And you can see there how much I was kind of fighting it and how much it's kind of trembling around. When you see stuff vibrate around like that, it always means there's a problem with the layering and with the overlapping. So I'm trying to kind of figure that out. And here I'm trying to figure out how the opening will work, because in the pattern we have a cod piece in the front, and the cod piece has these triangular pieces that kind of act as almost like a ramp from the panel to the crotch on which the cod piece will be sewn. Now the cod piece is a very, very, very funny looking thing from today's standard. I have to preface this. I hope the audience has the most maturity when looking at the next section, because it's definitely kind of funny. But just as a historical thing on why the cod piece is there and what's it used for, the precursor to like the hose were they were called brays. And basically, if you ever seen a picture of brays, they were not made with decency in mind. Like, there was so many cases of indecent exposure in medieval times because of the brays. So they developed this kind of thing that's kind of like a flap that goes and covers basically all the indecent areas of a man, you know. So that's what the codpiece is. And originally it was meant for to kind of help with that indecency, but then it quickly became this point of like focus, and it basically became more and more exaggerated as the times went on, which is very funny. I mean, there's when you start looking at some of the historical examples, there are some very, very funny examples of this through history. And this particular one basically has the flap, which that's the thing that's supposed to cover everything, and then that thing gets tied to the waistband. But then on top of the flap, it has like this padded piece, which I'm not sure what the functionality of it is. I'm pretty sure it's mostly like an aesthetic thing. And as we're trying to recreate the padded piece of the cod piece, it starts looking very, very funny. I'm not gonna lie. I also was internally laughing at this. It's not my first time. It's not my first rodeo, so it's not my first time creating a cod piece. But it's my first time trying this technique. And in CLO, I try to do it with the pressure settings, but the pressure settings they never work that well for me for this type of stuff, because it makes it fly around mostly, and it doesn't. I wish there was a function that worked more like stuffing, so it creates volume in something without kind of using these physics to have it like fly around like a balloon. So I'm just trying to figure this part out as much as I can, and honestly, this is all futile, because in the end I ended up not using this and just using my old technique of doing a quad piece, which is much easier because you're just doing a flap. I think in reality, if I were to try to replicate this one for one, I would just do the flap, which you see me doing here at this point. But then for the padded piece, I would probably just sculpt it in ZBrush and do it that way, because in CLO it's just a little bit too hard to create that effect, at least for now. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of how the cod piece goes, and I'm trying to make it work as much as possible here using the just some more techniques. Like, I'm trying to sew the piece I added pressure to onto the flap so that it gets held in place. And I just left a little bit of this fight here because it's kind of funny, and it also shows like a few different techniques at use. But I'm gonna skip ahead and show you how this technique ended up in the end. So yeah, this is what I was left off at the end of my struggles, and to be honest, I'm gonna show you the changes I made, because I ended up editing this a little bit more the next day, but I forgot to record. But I'll talk you through all the changes. The main one being that we had to scrap this cod piece. This was not it. It just looks funny to me, and I think it would take a lot of work in like a sculpture website to make it look proper. So I just didn't think it was good for just like a CLO, kind of like a CLO asset. Okay, so I actually worked on this a little bit more after the last recording, but I forgot to hit record. So I forgot to record the changes that I made, but I'll just go over them quickly here, just so you can see. First things first, the layers are still strengthened on the, the panels are still strengthened on the outside, so we still get that nice ballooning. But I think I took one of them out and I just spread them out a little bit more just so they sit a little bit nicer. And I actually, even though in the reference they were very, very close together, I like them when they're just a bit more open like this and you can see the lining. Just because I'm going to use this piece for an ArtStation project for my portfolio, I made that kind of, I guess, that creative choice because I thought it looks better. And also it's not necessarily unrealistic. I've definitely seen examples from the time that definitely had more gaps, such as this one. So it's not too unrealistic. And the other thing I did is I just made sure that they don't kind of twist around and they just fall down nicely. So basically if I take this one here, so basically what I did is I just kind of sewed them at the waist and then let them fall naturally, and I sewed them into the lining where they naturally fall, so they fall down straight. And the last thing I did is I changed the quad piece for this type of version, which the pattern is like this. It kind of creates the bulge with this kind of curve here, and it is just sewn in the same way into these like little triangle pieces underneath the crotch there. So that's kind of the only changes I made, and I'll show you how this looks as well. We're gonna hide the strength in here. I gave it its final kind of texture as well, so you can kind of get the idea much better of how these would look, especially with a good texture on it. It looks a lot better. I'll render it here. I have to stop talking when I render because it records my voice badly, but if you remember earlier in the video when I was showing the renders with the fabric, the CLO3D velvet fabric, it didn't look that great, but this one looks much better. So yeah, you can even see in the render just how much better the fabric looks, and yeah, I'm very happy with it. It definitely looks like a pair of Trunkhoses from that era, and yeah, I hope you liked the tutorial. I hope it was helpful, and I think the next one we're gonna start doing some more women's wear, and we're gonna look at some early forms of corsets. So yeah, stay tuned.